Thella pressed her back against the twisted metal, her breath coming in short, quiet gasps. The purple sky of Vexar churned overhead, storm clouds gathering in the distance. She adjusted her makeshift breathing apparatus, little more than scavenged filters attached to a cracked mask, and peered around the edge of the wreckage. 3 cycles had passed since the Elders had discovered her mutation. 3 cycles since they'd stripped her of citizenship and banished her to the toxic wastelands. For a Vexarian, being cast out was worse than death. It was erasure. Without access to the floating cities and their atmosphere shields, exiles typically survived less than half a cycle. Yet here she was, still breathing. A distant crash drew her attention. Something had fallen from the sky, not Vexarian technology with its characteristic blue glow, but something else entirely. Curiosity overcame caution, and Thella darted from her hiding place, 6-fingered hands clutching her meager possessions: a broken scanning device, a small water purifier, and a knife fashioned from ship debris. As she approached the crash site, she was surprised to find it wasn't a supply pod as she'd hoped. Instead, it was a vessel unlike any she'd seen before, crude and blocky, with no sign of anti-gravity technology. More puzzling still was the figure that emerged from it. The creature was bipedal like Vexarians, but lacked their characteristic iridescent skin. Instead, it was covered in dull fabrics and had exposed pink-beige skin on its face and hands, only 2 arms instead of 4, only 5 fingers on each hand. Thella's scanner, though damaged, confirmed what she could hardly believe: a human thousands of light years from Earth. She watched from behind a rock formation as the human assessed its surroundings. Its vessel was clearly beyond repair, the hull cracked open like a nut, yet the human showed no panic. Instead, he, according to her scanner, began methodically unloading supplies and examining the rocky terrain. What happened next baffled Thella completely. The human began gathering stones, ordinary worthless rocks, and stacking them in a pattern. Hour after hour he worked, seemingly oblivious to the toxic atmospherics that would eventually penetrate his primitive breathing apparatus. By nightfall he had constructed a rudimentary shelter of stacked stones against the side of a cliff. No force fields, no atmospheric regulators, just rocks. Thella couldn't contain her amusement. A laugh escaped her, a sound she hadn't made since her exile. Did this human actually believe stones would protect him from Vexar's predators or the roaming sentinel drones that hunted exiles? The sound carried across the wasteland, and the human's head snapped up. Their eyes met across the distance, his deep brown, her silvery with vertical pupils that marked her mutation. He raised a hand in what appeared to be a greeting. Thella shrank back. Contact with any sentient being was dangerous. The Elders had programmed the Sentinels to eliminate any exiles on sight, and bounty hunters earned handsome rewards for bringing back exile remains. This human couldn't possibly understand the danger they were both in. As night fully descended, the temperature plummeted. Thella retreated to her own hiding place, a narrow crevice in the cliffs that barely protected her from the elements. From there, she could just make out the glow of a small fire inside the human's stone hut. Fire openly displayed, it was practically an invitation to the Sentinels. "Fool," she whispered in her native tongue, pulling her tattered thermal wrap tighter. "You'll be dead by morning." Yet as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, Thella couldn't help wondering about the strange human who built with stones and made fire in the open. There was something in his methodical movements, in the confidence with which he faced this hostile world, that stirred something long dormant within her. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just curiosity about how long he would survive before Vexar claimed him, as it claimed all who weren't worthy of the Sky Cities. Either way, she decided, she would watch this strange human a while longer. If nothing else, his inevitable demise might teach her what mistakes to avoid in her own desperate bid for survival. 3 days of hunger drove Thella to do what fear had prevented: approach the human stone dwelling. Her rations were depleted and her traps had yielded nothing. Death by starvation or death by risk. The choice seemed simple enough when her stomach cramped painfully against her spine. The human had expanded his shelter considerably. What had begun as a crude heap of stones was now a surprisingly sturdy structure with a smoke hole and even a small, covered entryway. More surprising still, he remained alive. Thella crouched behind a boulder, watching him work. His movements were economical, practiced. He used no sonic cutters or molecular bonders, just his hands and simple tools he'd fashioned from debris. Currently, he was using a metal shard to carve notches into a long piece of wood. Her scanner had identified him as Maddox from fragments of transmissions it had captured. The language it translated was called English, primitive but functional. Gathering her courage, Thella stepped into view, hands raised in the universal gesture of non-aggression. "Food," she said, the translation implant in her throat struggling with the unfamiliar word. "Need food." The human Maddox looked up sharply. For a moment, he remained perfectly still, assessing her with eyes that reminded her of Vexar's rarest gemstones, deep amber flecked with gold. Then, slowly, he set down his work and nodded. "Come," he said, gesturing toward the entrance of his dwelling. Against every instinct, Thela followed him inside. The interior was surprisingly warm and dry. A small fire burned in a carefully constructed pit, the smoke rising through a cleverly designed shaft that dispersed it to avoid detection. Around the edges of the single room, she saw his supplies organized with military precision. Maddox retrieved a sealed container and offered her something wrapped in foil. The scanner identified it as emergency rations, human-compatible caution, high sodium. Thela's 4 hands trembled as she accepted it. "Why help?" she asked. Maddox smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Why not?" He tapped his chest. "Human you," he pointed at her. "Vexarian," she replied, carefully unwrapping the food. "Exile." He nodded as if this explained everything. Also exiled, very far from home. As Thela ate, Maddox returned to his work. His hands moved methodically, shaping stone and wood. She observed with growing fascination how he tested each piece, adjusting and refining until it fit perfectly with the others. "What make?" she asked, pointing to his current project. "Tools first, weapons next, then better shelter." He held up what appeared to be a crude hammer, Stone Age technology, very old human way. Thela frowned. "Not enough. Sentinels have plasma weapons, hunters have stealth shields." Maddox's expression hardened. "Show me these sentinels." Using a stick, Thela drew in the dirt floor, the hovering drones, the elite hunters with their four-armed combat stance, the locations of sensor arrays in the nearby ridges. Maddox absorbed every detail, asking questions that revealed a tactical mind far sharper than she'd expected. As night fell, Thela knew she should leave. Instead, she found herself helping him reinforce his shelter. Her knowledge of Vexarian technology, even with limited resources, complemented his primitive but ingenious techniques. "How survive so long?" Maddox asked as they worked. "Other exiles." Thela's hands stilled. "All dead, I'm different," she gestured to her eyes with their vertical pupils. "Mutation, elders say impure." Maddox studied her face, then shrugged. "Adaptation, not impurity, better vision in dim light." When she nodded, he smiled. "Useful here, advantage." The simple reframing stunned her. All her life, her mutation had been her shame, her destruction. To have it called an advantage. "Tomorrow," Maddox said, breaking into her thoughts, "I teach you make tools, you teach me about sentinels, both survive better." That night, Thela slept in the corner of the stone hut, wrapped in a thermal blanket Maddox had insisted she take. She watched him through half-closed eyes as he studied her drawings of the sentinels, his fingers tracing patterns in the dirt that made no sense to her. For the first time since her exile, Thela felt something beyond mere determination to survive. This human, with his primitive methods and unexpected kindness, had offered her something she'd never expected to find in the wastelands. Partnership, purpose, and perhaps, though she hardly dared think it, the beginning of hope. But as she drifted toward sleep, a troubling thought surfaced. The sentinels would eventually detect the heat signature of the shelter, and when that happened, all the stacked stones in the world wouldn't save them from what would come. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm neither Thela nor Maddox could have anticipated. Each day, the human expanded his knowledge of Vexar's dangers, while Thela learned the forgotten art of creating from nothing but stone and salvage. Her 4 hands proved adept at the detailed work Maddox taught her, crafting tools with a precision that sometimes surpassed his own. "Your people forgot these skills?" Maddox asked one evening as they shared a meal of desert rodents he had trapped. Thela's vertical pupils contracted in the firelight. "No need, fabricators make everything, print what we want." "Until they break," Maddox observed, gesturing at their surroundings. "Then what?" She had no answer. In the floating cities, nothing ever broke beyond repair. Obsolete things were simply recycled, reprocessed, reprinted. The concept of creating without technology was as alien to her as breathing toxic air. "Your world," she asked, her translation implant better calibrated now, "it is like this, building with hands." Maddox's smile held something sad. "Some places, yes. Other places, technology like your cities. I was, military, special forces. We trained both ways, technology fails, Earth skills don't." That night, Thela dreamed of Earth, a planet she had only seen in educational hollows. A world of stone and water and life, not like Vexar with its toxic atmosphere and barren landscapes. In her dream, Maddox showed her forests and oceans, his hands strong and sure as they built shelters among trees. She woke abruptly, her secondary heart pounding in alarm. Something was wrong. Maddox was already up, a finger pressed to his lips. He pointed to the scanner she had modified with parts from his ship's emergency beacon. The screen flickered with two heat signatures approaching from the northeast, precisely where the nearest sensor array was located. Hunters, she whispered, fear constricting her throat. Elite trackers. Maddox's face showed no fear, only calm assessment. How many usually? Two partners, she swallowed hard. They will have sonic pikes, neural disruptors, maybe phase rifles. He nodded as if she'd merely described a change in weather. Wait here. Before she could protest, he slipped out through a narrow passage he'd built into the rear wall, an escape route she hadn't even noticed. Thela crouched in the darkness, her mutation allowing her to see the interior of the shelter with perfect clarity despite the doused fire. Minutes stretched like hours. The scanner showed the hunters approaching methodically, sweeping the area with sensors that would eventually detect the residual heat from their fire pit. Thela gripped her knife, pitifully inadequate against elite hunters, and prepared to run. Then she heard it, a low rumble followed by the distinctive crack of stone against stone. The hunters' heat signatures separated, a standard flanking maneuver, one heading directly for the shelter, one circling to cut off escape. The rumble grew louder. Thela's eyes widened as she realized what Maddox had done. During their weeks together, he hadn't just been building a shelter. He'd been studying the terrain, noting the unstable rock formations, the steep ravines. A sudden shout in the Vexarian high language, a cry cut brutally short. The scanner showed one heat signature disappearing, then reappearing much weaker. The second hunter changed course, rushing toward their fallen comrade. That was when the night erupted. A carefully constructed stone dam, released at precisely the right moment, sent a cascade of boulders down the narrow ravine. Thela felt the impact through the ground beneath her, a shuddering testimony to the kinetic force unleashed. The scanner went wild, then settled. Both heat signatures were now stationary, one barely registering. When Maddox returned, he was covered in dust and breathing hard. A cut above his eye leaked crimson blood, but his expression remained calm, focused. One dead, he reported matter-of-factly, one trapped, badly injured. Thela stared at him in disbelief. How? They have shield technology, targeting systems. Technology needs power, Maddox said, wiping blood from his face. I watched, learned patrol pattern, found power sources. He held up a small, glowing component, waited until shields cycled, then he made a crushing gesture with his hands. A boulder, Thela whispered, understanding dawning. You dropped a boulder when the shields were resetting. Simple physics, mass beats energy if timed right, he pointed to the scanner. The living one, your people or mine. The question struck Thela like a physical blow. These hunters had come to kill her, to erase her existence as the elders had commanded. They were Vexarians who would have executed her without hesitation. Yet they were her peoples. Mine, she admitted, we should. Question, Maddox finished. Need information, more will come. Thela followed him outside, her mind struggling to reconcile the gentle teacher of crafts with this efficient predator who had just outmaneuvered elite hunters with nothing but stones and patience. The injured hunter lay pinned beneath a boulder, his lower limbs crushed. His eyes, horizontal pupils marking him as pureblood, widened in pain and fury when he saw Thela. Abomination, he spat in the Vexarian high language. The elders were right to cast you out. Maddox knelt beside the hunter, his expression unreadable. Ask him how many more coming, ask him why now. As Thela translated, she realized a terrifying truth. This human, with his Stone Age weapons and his quiet confidence, had just accomplished what no exile had ever managed. He had defeated those who hunted them. And something in his amber eyes told her this was only the beginning. Dawn broke across the wastelands, painting the toxic clouds in hues of amber and violet. Inside the stone shelter, Thela tended to Maddox's wounds, a deep gash on his forearm where the second hunter had struck him with a neural pike, and various cuts from his nighttime battle with the terrain itself. Hold still, she murmured, applying salvaged medical gel from his ship's emergency kit. Her 4 hands worked in perfect coordination, 2 holding the wound closed while the others applied the treatment. Maddox watched her with intensity that made her secondary heart quicken its pace. You have healer training. Basic medical protocols, she confirmed. All Vexarians learn before specialization. She didn't add that she'd never completed her specialization, her mutation had been discovered first. The injured hunter had revealed much before succumbing to his wounds. A new purification edict had been issued. All exiles were to be eliminated, not merely banished. Something had changed in the political structure of the floating cities. A new elder had risen to power with a vision of genetic purity that exceeded even traditional Vexarian prejudices. They know about you now, Thela said, finishing the bandage. The hunter transmitted before you disabled his communications. They will send more. Maddox nodded, flexing his arm to test the bandage. Expected that, need better defenses. He rose and walked to the entrance of their shelter. From this vantage point, the stone structure no longer looked primitive to Thela's eyes. It was positioned perfectly back against unscalable cliffs, front overlooking the only viable approach path. The seemingly random piles of rocks nearby were, she now realized, carefully arranged deadfalls and traps. Maddox hadn't built a hut, he'd built a fortress. "Show me," she said suddenly, stepping beside him. "Teach me how you see land." He turned to her, surprise briefly crossing his features, then that rare smile that transformed his weathered face. Yes, important skill. For the next several hours, they walked the perimeter of what Maddox called his defensive zone. He pointed out natural choke points, demonstrated how to recognize stable versus unstable rock formations, explained concepts of fields of fire and mutual support positions. Thela absorbed it all, her quick mind recognizing the elegant simplicity of his approach. "You're military," she ventured as they paused atop a ridge. "They fight like this, with stones." Maddox laughed, the sound startling in its warmth. "No, much more technology, but principles same, use environment, understand terrain, create advantage." He picked up a stone, turning it thoughtfully in his hand. Technologies change, physics doesn't. As the sun reached its zenith, they returned to the shelter to escape the most toxic part of the day's atmosphere. Inside, Maddox added wood to their small fire, carefully controlled to produce minimal smoke. The routine had become familiar, almost domestic. "Maddox," Thela began, settling across from him, "your world Earth, you will try to return." His hand stilled momentarily. "Ship beyond repair, no communication range, rescue." He shook his head. "Not likely." The implications settled between them. He was as stranded as she was exiled. Neither of them had a home to return to. "Then we build here," she said with sudden determination. "Make this place ours." Something shifted in his eyes, a recognition, a decision made. He moved around the fire pit until he sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his strange, alien body. "Thela," he said, her name sounding different in his human intonation, "why help me? Could have left. Safer alone." The question caught her off guard. Why indeed? At first it had been need, hunger, the protection his shelter offered, but now. "You see differently," she finally answered, her inner eyelids fluttering with emotion. "Not mutation, not exile, you see, person," she gestured at the shelter around them. "You build, create, I never knew how." Maddox's hand, so strange with its 5 fingers, moved slowly toward hers. When it touched her iridescent skin, she didn't pull away. His palm was rough with calluses, warm with alien blood. "I see you," he said simply. The moment stretched between them, a bridge across galaxies of difference. Then, with a boldness that surprised her, Thela leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, the most intimate gesture in Vexarian culture, the sharing of thoughts. Maddox seemed to understand instinctively, his free hand coming up to cup the back of her head, holding her there as their breath mingled. There was no translation needed for this language they were creating between them. When they finally separated, something fundamental had changed. The shelter was no longer just a tactical position or a survival necessity. It had become the beginning of something neither of them had dared hope for. "Home." "Tomorrow," Maddox said, his voice rougher than before, "we expand. More traps, better walls, water collection." "And if more hunters come?" Thela asked, though she already knew his answer. His smile now held a fierce edge that sent a shiver of anticipation through her. "Let them come, we'll be ready." As night fell, they lay side by side on the sleeping platform he had built, closer than they had ever slept before. In the darkness, illuminated only by the dying embers of their fire, Thela traced the contours of his alien face with gentle fingertips, memorizing every line and angle. Different, yes, but no longer strange. Outside, the winds of Vexar howled across the wastelands, carrying toxic particles and the promise of coming storms. But within their walls of stone, walls built by human hands and now maintained by Vexarian ones as well, they had created something the floating cities with all their technology could never manufacture. A sanctuary built of blood and stone, and something more, a future neither of them had imagined possible. The first others arrived as the toxic season began to wane, 3 Vexarian exiles, half-starved and desperate. They approached with caution, having heard impossible rumors, a fortress in the wasteland built by an alien who had defeated elite hunters with stones. Maddox watched them from the observation post he had constructed atop the cliff. "Your decision," he told Thela, who stood beside him, "your people." 3 months had transformed their shelter into something remarkable, a compound of interconnected stone structures, each serving a specific purpose. Water collection systems gathered precious moisture from the atmosphere. Carefully constructed smoke channels dispersed heat signatures to confuse sentinel scans. A network of early warning systems, primitive but effective, surrounded the perimeter. 3 months had also transformed them. Thella's once emaciated frame had filled out with the regular meals Maddox's hunting provided. Her iridescent skin glowed with health, the vertical pupils of her mutation no longer a mark of shame but a badge of survival. And Maddox, his body had adapted to Vexar's gravity, growing leaner and harder, his movements calibrated perfectly to this alien environment. We help them, Thella decided, taking his hand. Teach them. The new arrivals brought valuable intelligence. The floating cities were in turmoil. Reports of a human surviving in the wastelands had reached even the highest levels of society. More concerning to the elders were rumors that exiles were gathering, learning to survive where they should have perished. They fear us, one exile explained, a female named Cora with a mutation that had given her enhanced olfactory senses. They fear what it means if we survive without their technology. Maddox absorbed this information with typical stoicism. That night, as he and Thella lay entwined in their private chamber, her 4 arms wrapped protectively around his 2, he broke his silence. It's beginning, he murmured against her neck. Revolution always starts small, outcasts, forgotten ones. Thella traced the scar on his chest, a souvenir from the second wave of hunters they had defeated together. Not revolution, she corrected. Evolution, new way of living. His amber eyes found hers in the darkness. Same thing sometimes. More exiles came as the seasons turned. Some stayed, others took what knowledge they could gather and established their own outposts in the wastelands. A network formed primitive by Vexarian standards but effective. Stone shelters, water collection, defensive positions, and always Maddox's philosophy: use the environment, understand the terrain, create advantage. The human taught them to build. Thella taught them to adapt Vexarian technology to work without the floating city's power grid. Together, they created something neither civilization had imagined, a hybrid community that honored both heritage and innovation. Their relationship deepened with each challenge overcome. The differences in their physiologies became bridges to cross rather than barriers. Maddox's single heart beating against her dual ones, his 5 fingers interlaced with her 6, languages merging into a pidgin that became the settlement's common tongue. 1 year after his crash landing, as they stood watching their community's first successful crop harvest, plants genetically modified by a botanist exile to thrive in Vexar's soil, Maddox took Thella's primary hands in his. In my culture, he said, his voice rough with emotion, we have ceremony, partnership, life bond. Thella's pupils dilated fully, her secondary heart racing. In mine as well, thought impossible for exile. Nothing impossible, he countered, the phrase that had become his mantra, just problems needing solutions. Their ceremony combined earth and Vexarian traditions. A circle of stones under Vexar's purple sky, vows spoken in 2 languages, witnessed by 36 exiles who had found home in their shadow. The warning came the next day. A massive force gathering in the floating cities. Elite hunters, sentinel drones, even military-grade weapons platforms being prepared. The new elder had declared the wasteland settlements a threat to Vexarian purity that must be eradicated. The council, 6 exiles and Maddox, gathered in what had once been a simple stone hut and was now their community's central hall. We should scatter, argued one, hide deeper in the wastelands. Fight, urged another, we have numbers now. All eyes turned to Maddox, who stood with Thella at his side, their hands linked in the gesture that had become symbolic of their union of differences. Neither, he said simply, we invite them. The proposal shocked everyone except Thella, who had come to understand her mate's strategic mind. Over the next 3 days they prepared not for battle but for demonstration. Each exile contributed their specialized knowledge. Former engineers cast out for physical mutations. Scientists whose genetic variations had deemed them impure. Artists whose visions had threatened the status quo. When the armada from the floating cities arrived, sleek vessels bristling with weapons, hunters in full combat gear, they found not a hidden settlement of primitives, but an organized community standing openly before stone structures arrayed in perfect defensive positions. Maddox and Thella stood at the forefront, unarmed but unafraid. The lead hunter's voice boomed through an amplifier. By order of the elders, this illegal settlement is to be dismantled. All exiles will submit for processing. Thella stepped forward, her voice clear and carrying. We invite the elders themselves to land, to see what we have built here, to witness the future of Vexar. A murmur ran through the hunter ranks. Such boldness was unprecedented. After tense minutes of communication with the floating cities, a single vessel descended. From it emerged three robed figures, elders, setting foot upon the toxic surface for the first time in generations, protected by personal shield technology. Maddox watched impassively as they approached, their expressions visible even through their protective masks: disgust, curiosity, and undeniable fear. "What abomination is this?" demanded the lead elder, eyes fixed on Maddox. "Human and mutation coexisting, building in dirt like primitives." Thella's four hands remained steady as she gestured to the settlement behind them. "Not primitives, pioneers. We have adapted to survive where your technology said we could not. We have built what your fabricators cannot, a community that grows stronger with each difference it embraces." Maddox stepped forward, his stance relaxed but commanding. "Your choice now, war which will cost you more than you know." His eyes swept over the terrain, the carefully positioned defensive measures visible and invisible. "Or exchange, knowledge, alliance, future." The elder's eyes narrowed. "You threaten us," from hovels of stone. Maddox smiled then, the expression containing all the quiet confidence that had first intrigued Thella. "Not threat, promise. Stone endures, empires fall." A tense silence followed, broken only by the whistling of Vexar's toxic winds across stone structures built to withstand them. Finally, the youngest elder spoke. Show us what you have built here." As Thella and Maddox led the elders through their settlement, past water reclamation systems more efficient than those in the floating cities, past gardens growing food in soil declared barren, past exiles working with both advanced technology and simple tools, they knew a threshold had been crossed. That night, as diplomatic vessels departed with promises of return, Maddox and Thella stood on the roof of what had once been a simple stone hut against a cliff. "Foundation," Maddox said, looking over the community they had built together. "Just the beginning." Thella leaned into him, her four arms embracing his alien form that had become more familiar to her than her own people. Above them, the stars of a galaxy neither could have crossed alone. Beneath them, stones stacked by hand, creating not just shelter but future. "Foundation," she agreed, the word carrying all the promise of worlds colliding, differences becoming strengths, and the most primitive element of all, love, building what advanced technology never could. A home among the stars, built one stone at a time.